Whether you're a visitor or a resident of Chicago, I think it's important to understand the fundamentals of the Chicago River if you want to understand why Chicago is where it is and how the river and the water around us affect our lives. I like to say we live inside of a history book, and the chapter we're going to talk about today is the Chicago River. You can read the history all around you if you know what you're looking for. When you move around the city, look for clues to Chicago's past and historical markers, the architecture, the street names, and the basic structure of the streets. Some questions to ask yourself is, why is the city where it is? How do we get water to our homes, and how do we dispose of the waste we put down our sinks or down our toilets? Where does the rainwater go? And do we have to live with past decisions? This is a chance to get an overview of some interesting things to know. This is Reno Lovison, executive producer at ChicagoBroadcastingNetwork.com, hoping to share some information that might enhance your visit to Michigan Avenue and the Chicago River. Take a moment to pause on the Michigan Avenue Bridge and take a look around. Imagine a time before the Wrigley Building and the Tribune Tower and the Marina City Corncob Towers. When you take a trip down to the Chicago River, imagine what it was like 200 years ago, 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago. Actually, some important things have happened in just the past 10 years, so even now we're living through history. Before European settlers entered the area, Native Americans, indigenous people, used the river to travel and to share trade goods by boat, which was much easier than traveling with animals across the land or simply walking. Traveling by water and trading in this way, people had more access to a wider variety of food and other essential goods like beads, cloth, and pottery. The process of trading also helped to build alliances that in some cases prevented conflicts and in other cases sadly created conflicts. But it all started with people's ability to travel farther and easier by water. That's why understanding the history of the river is important. It shaped our past and continues to affect us today and even into the future. Before any Europeans visited this area, there was an important place, later to be known as the Chicago Portage. The word portage or portage comes from a French word, and it refers to the moving of your canoe, boat, or other watercraft over land. And it's not easy to do. You want to find the shortest distance between two waterways. The Chicago Portage was a swampy 6-mile stretch of land between the south branch of the Chicago River and the Des Plaines River. By crossing that short distance, indigenous people could establish trade routes throughout the Great Lakes and up and down the Mississippi River and beyond. In 1673, local Miami people told French-Canadian explorers Father Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet about this shortcut, and that really changed the whole dynamic of the area. It took about 100 years from that point, but in 1779, Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable located the first permanent trading post at the mouth of the Chicago River, becoming the first non-indigenous settler in the area. His role in establishing this settlement laid the foundation for what would eventually become the city of Chicago. Born in Haiti with both Black African and white European ancestry, today he's recognized as the founder of Chicago. Prior to his arrival, the area around what is now Chicago was originally inhabited by several indigenous nations, including the Potawatomi, Miami, and Illinois people. The Potawatomi were the dominant group in the region, and in fact, DuSable's wife was a local Potawatomi woman. So why was this trading post location important or strategic? DuSable established relationships with indigenous people, French and English explorers, trappers, and other traders as far away as Green Bay and Detroit. He bought things like flour and bacon and eggs and butter and cloth and then traded them for fur, mostly beaver pelts, which he sold to other traders to make money. An interesting fashion fact is beaver pelts were primarily used to create top hats for high-fashion society gentlemen in Europe. Once word got around that DuSable had created good relations with the indigenous people and that this area was a good place to trade neat stuff, the American government got involved and established Fort Dearborn in 1803. If you take a trip down to Michigan Avenue and the river, DuSable's trading post was on the northeast side and Fort Dearborn was on the southeast side of what is now Michigan Avenue and the river. Look for the markers on the sidewalk when you visit, but keep in mind that when you're on the street in that area, you're actually about 50 or more feet above the ground. so the actual locations were at that spot but below you. As a result of a few treaties and a few wars between the U.S. and Native peoples, most of the indigenous people were moved away west of the Mississippi River, and Chicago was officially established as a city. By 1837, the population grew from about 200 people a few years earlier to about 4,000 people. So we're a city, now what? Rule number one about rivers is smaller bodies of water typically flow into larger bodies of water. Simply put, in this case, the river naturally flowed into the lake. We needed drinking water, and we needed to get rid of human waste and other trash from the growing city. Drinking water generally came, and still does, from the lake. Waste was dumped into the river, but the river flows into the lake, so people began getting sick from the polluted lake water. The first solution was to put a couple of long pipes out about 2 miles into the lake to draw water from the fresher, deeper, cleaner water away from the mouth of the river. These water inlets are called cribs, and you can still see slightly more modern versions of them out there today. Eventually, there were 9 cribs in total. 2 are still working today, and your drinking water still starts its journey to your sink from the inlet crib. The first part of the second solution was the digging of the Illinois and Michigan Canal, opened in the spring of 1848. This essentially made it possible to use the Chicago portage without having to drag your boat, and created a huge boom for business because goods could now be shipped in and out of Chicago to places as far away as New Orleans by waterway, even easier. In 1855, the city began a comprehensive sewer system, but its design simply dumped more sewage and rainwater into the river. Making matters even worse, in 1865, the Union Stockyards opened in Bridgeport. It became the largest slaughterhouse in the world. A short tributary to the river became a giant ditch where meatpackers discarded their unwanted carcasses, bones, and rancid oils. The methane gases which resulted from rotting meat would bubble to the surface, giving this tributary the nickname of Bubbly Creek. Mixing all of this together were all manner of boats, from schooners to steamers, tugboats, and paddle boats, creating a great slurry of raw sewage. In 1868, the Chicago River Port was the busiest in the world. You might say the opposite of water is fire, and the event of October 1871 has come to be known as the Great Chicago Fire. Most of the city's buildings were constructed from wood, and Chicago had received only 1 inch of rain for 3 months from July 4th to October 9th that year, causing severe drought conditions. It was very dry, so when the fire started, it soon burned out of control, consuming virtually the entire city. Since the fire started on the south side, it was hoped that the Chicago River would stop the fire's advance, but the flames were so high they leapt over the river, burning buildings on both sides. Also, the winds blew blazing embers across the river. In the aftermath, one of the few remaining structures was the Chicago Water Tower at Chicago and Michigan Avenue. And you can still see it there today. It's that sort of castle-like looking building. Imagine when you stand there, look around, and imagine that there's absolutely nothing around. Everything has been destroyed, and the only thing standing is that building. When you stand on the bridge across Michigan Avenue, imagine fire on both sides and flames leaping across with burning embers in the sky. It had to be really frightening. After the fire, the river was still basically an open sewer. But now steel mills, lumber yards, meat, glue, soap, and leather plants grew up along the river, dumping their industrial waste into its waters as well. Luckily, someone soon had the bright idea to defy natural science and reverse the flow of the river. It was a crazy idea. It had never been done before. But basically, by digging the river deeper near the portage and letting gravity pull it in that direction, they were able to reverse the flow of the river. Construction of the 28-mile sanitary and ship canal began in 1892 and was completed in 1900. At the time, it was the biggest canal ever constructed, and in fact, the chief engineer went on to supervise the building of the Panama Canal. The fire was a disaster, but it was also a chance to start with a fresh idea and rebuild the city with a long-range plan. In 1909, city planners Daniel Burnham and Edward Bennett reimagined both the lake and the river as an important part of their sweeping plan. They would alleviate overcrowding of ships in the narrow river by building several lakefront piers. Out of that proposal came the now famous tourist attraction, Navy Pier, originally completed in 1916. They also imagined a beautiful bridge across Michigan Avenue, which had already become established as Chicago's main street at the time, now known as the Magnificent Mile or Mag Mile. They planned an elegant street and waterway above the south edge of the river, which became Wacker Drive. Chicago has no private residences on the lake, instead has a beautiful park along our lakefront because in 1919, the Lakefront Ordinance was passed, restricting development of the lakefront from the Chicago River to 47th Street. This left the lakefront accessible for all residents of the city to enjoy. Eventually, the steep, marshy banks of the river were reinforced and cleaned to make the river's edge more defined. Nearby streets were elevated to help keep water out of the buildings and off the streets during periods of severe rain. When you walk down Michigan Avenue from Randolph Street to about Superior, you're actually on a platform high above the natural ground. Take a walk or drive on Lower Michigan Avenue, Lower Wacker Drive, or Lower Columbus Drive to get an idea where the ground level actually is. The final part of this story is in 1975, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District of Greater Chicago began construction of the Deep Tunnel and Reservoir Plan, called TARP, or simply called Deep Tunnel, which installed a series of huge tunnels under the city and suburbs connected to massive reservoirs to provide storage for billions of gallons of combined sewer and stormwater that overwhelmed the sewer system during rainstorms. Instead of untreated sewage flowing into the river when it rained, the sewage would now be shunted into the deep tunnel to be stored until the rainstorm passed and the sewer system could handle the excess. By the early 1990s, the water quality and habitat quality of the Chicago River has shown major improvement. TARP will be finished around 2028, so occasionally after a heavy rainstorm, some sewage still reaches the river, though much less frequently than before. Chicago has done such a good job of managing its sewage and water runoff that large cities around the world are looking at Chicago to see how to handle their water situations. The Chicago River has probably never looked better than it does today. Mr. and Mrs. DuSable and the Potawatomi, Miami, and Illinois people would be quite surprised to see what's become of their river. So whether you're a Chicago resident or a visitor, be sure to take a walk down to the Riverwalk. Enjoy the Chicago River because it's never looked any better than it does today. And it's a great place to enjoy Chicago architecture, take a boat trip, and just enjoy the city. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to look for some of our other stories about Chicago history or just some of our other podcast episodes. This is Reno Lovison, executive producer at ChicagoBroadcastingNetwork.com. Of course, encouraging you to please like or subscribe to our podcast if you enjoyed what you heard, and visit ChicagoBroadcastingNetwork.com to see what else we have to offer.